There is a room inside Argentwhile Academy that no living student is allowed to enter without invitation. It sits beneath the central rotunda, 3 flights below the visible floor, and its walls are made of a pale gray stone that the founder cut himself 200 years ago. The room has only one door, and the door has only one purpose. Students who walk into the Dismissal Chamber do not walk out of it as students. They walk out as nothing at all. On the morning this story begins, a 19-year-old girl named Mireth Solandar was scheduled to walk through that door in 14 days. She did not know it yet. She would find out at the end of the week when the proctor handed back her 7th failed examination of the term and laughed out loud in front of the entire hall. My name is RiseArc, and I have spent the last 6 months of my life sitting in the dust-choked side archives of the academy that this girl rebuilt, reading every letter she ever wrote, every parchment she ever stained, and every dismissal order that was issued and then quietly burned. What I am about to tell you is the story of how a student who failed every exam the system could throw at her ended up rewriting the system itself in 72 hours. It is the story of a discipline of magic that the academy had forgotten how to teach, of a bloodline that the faculty had pretended did not exist, and of 3 rival schools that wanted her dead before she turned 20. But first, dear viewer, you need to understand the room, because everything that follows began the day Mireth Solandar walked out of an examination she did not know she had already passed. The examination hall of Argentwhile Academy is a long, vaulted chamber with arched windows running down one side and an enormous painted ceiling depicting the founder, Magister Velvern Auralis, holding a quill in one hand and a flame in the other. The students sit in rows of polished black desks, each desk equipped with an iron inkwell that the academy refills twice a day. The proctor stands at the front on a raised dais, watching for cheating, watching for fainting, watching for the small surrenders that mark a student who has given up. On the morning of the 7th failure, Mireth sat in her usual seat, 3rd row from the back, 2nd desk from the wall. She had been sitting in that exact seat for 2 years. The chair had a small crack in the left rear leg that she had memorized. The desk had an ink stain shaped like a thumbprint on the upper right corner, and she had spent so many hours staring at that stain that she could have drawn it from memory with her eyes closed. The examination was Theoretical Resonance, 3rd tier, and it consisted of 42 questions about the proper structure of incantations under varying atmospheric conditions. Mireth had written the exam in 2.5 hours. She had answered every question. She had checked her work twice. And when the proctor, a thin man named Halvar Thren, walked down the aisle collecting parchments, she handed hers to him with the same quiet expression she always wore. What she did not see, because no student ever sees it, was what happened to her parchment in the assessment vault that night. The vault is a small octagonal room behind the Chancellor's office, lit by enchanted lamps that burn without fuel, and inside it sits a single black stone the size of a man's torso. The stone is called the Reader. It is older than the Academy. The founder brought it with him when he built the first wall. And the way the Reader works is this. Any parchment placed upon its surface is consumed by a slow blue light, and after a few minutes, the light fades and the reader reports a single number between 0 and 100. That number is the student's grade. No human reads the answers. No human can. The questions are too many, the variations too vast, the standards too precise. Only the reader can judge. On the night Mireth's 7th exam was placed upon the reader, the blue light flickered, hesitated, and then reported a grade of 3. 3 out of 100. Lower than guessing, lower than blank parchment, lower than any score the assessment vault had recorded in the 76 years since its last calibration. The proctor, Halvar Thren, was informed the next morning. He looked at the score, looked at the name on the parchment, and he laughed. He did not laugh because it was funny. He laughed because by then, in the 3rd year of Mireth Solandar's attendance at Argentwhile, the faculty had developed a kind of collective gallows humor about her case. 7 exams, 7 catastrophic failures. The girl was an anomaly. The girl was a scholarship mistake. The girl was, as one professor had written in the margin of her last evaluation, __, quote, _, 0, __. So when Halvar Thren walked into the examination hall that afternoon to return the graded parchments, and when he reached Mireth's desk and laid the parchment face up so the entire room could see the number 3 written in red wax across the top, he did not bother to lower his voice. He turned to the proctor's assistant, who walked behind him with the records book, and he said, loud enough for 42 students to hear, quote 1. The room laughed. Not all of it, but enough of it. The students in the front rows, the ones who came from the noble houses and who had been laughing at Mireth since her first week, laughed openly. The students in the middle rows, the merchant class scholarship students who knew that any of them could be next, laughed more nervously. And the students in the back, the few quiet ones who had never spoken to Mireth but who had also never mocked her, looked down at their desks and said nothing. Mireth herself did not look up. She did not flinch. She did not blush. She took the parchment in both hands, folded it neatly into quarters, and slid it into the leather satchel at her feet. Then she sat through the remaining 40 minutes of the period with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the painted ceiling above, where Magister Velvern Auralis held his quill and his flame and seemed, in the soft afternoon light, to be looking down directly at her. When the bell rang and the students filed out, Mireth was the last to leave. She walked through the corridor, down the marble staircase, across the central courtyard, and out through the eastern gate. By the time she reached the cobbled path that led to the student dormitories, the sky had opened and the rain had begun. It was the kind of rain that arrives without warning in the highland country where Argentwhile is built, the kind that comes sideways off the mountains and soaks through wool in less than a minute. Mireth did not run. She did not put up the hood of her cloak. She walked at the same measured pace she always walked, and by the time she reached the small bridge over the irrigation canal, she was wet to the skin. It was on that bridge, with the rain hammering the parchment in her satchel and the cold water running down the back of her neck, that she stopped. She did not know why she stopped. Something had asked her to. She took the satchel off her shoulder, opened it, and pulled out the folded parchment. The red wax number 3 had begun to bleed in the rain. The ink of her own writing, the answers she had spent 2.5 hours composing, had begun to bleed as well, running in long, dark streams down the soaked paper and pooling in the creases of the folds. Mireth stood on the bridge and watched her own work dissolve. And then, dear viewer, something happened that she would later describe as the moment her entire life finally made sense. The ink did not run off the parchment and into the river. It ran up. It rose, against the rain, against gravity, against every law she had ever been taught, and it gathered in a small dark cloud above the paper. And then, slowly, deliberately, like a creature returning home, it flowed back into her right hand. She felt it enter her skin. She felt it enter her skin. It did not hurt. It did not even feel strange. It felt, dear viewer, like a key sliding into a lock that had been waiting 200 years to be turned. The ink settled somewhere behind her sternum, warm and patient, and for the first time in 3 years of attending Argentwhile Academy, Mireth Solandar understood what every single one of her 7 examinations had actually been asking her. The questions had never been wrong. Her answers had never been wrong. She had been writing in a language the reader had simply forgotten how to read. She stood there on the bridge for a long time. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the distance, the bell at the dormitory tower rang the 7th hour, which meant supper was being served and the kitchens were closing in 30 minutes. Mireth did not move toward the dormitory. She turned and walked back the way she had come, toward the academy, toward the eastern gate she had left through an hour earlier. By the time she reached the gate, the rain had stopped. The clouds had not parted, but the rain had quieted into a thin mist that clung to the lanterns. The night porter, an old man named Brunwick Holdmer, who had worked the gate for 40 years, looked up from his stool as she approached. He said, surprised, Mireth stopped in the gate arch. She thought about the question, and then she said the first sentence of the rest of her life. __quote _4 __. The main library of Argentwhile is not the building most students think it is. The building most students think is the library is the Hall of Standing Volumes, a beautiful 3-story rotunda with polished oak shelves and reading lamps and quiet leather chairs, where undergraduates go to study for their examinations and where young couples go to pretend to study while passing notes. Almost no real books are kept there. The real library is underneath it. To reach the real library, you descend a narrow spiral staircase behind the rotunda's eastern column. You pass through a small, unmarked door, and you enter a chamber the size of a cathedral, lit only by floating glass orbs that follow you at shoulder height. The shelves run from floor to ceiling. The ceiling is 40 feet high, and the books on those shelves have not been cataloged in their entirety since the founder's grandson died. The chamber has one inhabitant. Her name is Esmara Velinord. She is 91 years old. She has been the Night Librarian for 63 of those years, and on the night Mireth Solandar walked down those stairs, dripping rainwater on the marble, Esmara was sitting at her small desk eating a cold piece of bread and reading a manuscript that had not been opened in 80 years. She looked up when Mireth entered. She looked at the wet hair, the bleeding examination parchment still clutched in the girl's left hand, and the expression on the girl's face. And before Mireth could say a single word, Esmara set down her bread, closed the manuscript, and said something that Mireth would remember for the rest of her life. Quote 5. Mireth stared at her. Quote 6. Esmara said. Quote 7. Quote 8. Quote 9. Now hold on, dear viewer, because this is one of those moments where an entire story pivots on a single human being. Esmara Velinord was not a famous figure at Argentwhile. She was not on any council. She was not consulted by the chancellor. She was not invited to faculty dinners. She was an old woman who lived alone in 2 small rooms behind the deep stacks, and the only people who knew she existed were the handful of advanced students who had bothered to look for actual books rather than rotunda decorations. But Esmara Velinord was the last person alive who had read, in full, the private notebooks of Magister Velvern Auralis. She had read them as a girl of 18, before they had been moved to the sealed vault. And she had remembered every page. She had spent 63 years waiting to see a student walk down those stairs with the look that Mireth Solandar wore that night. Esmara pulled a chair from the wall and set it across from her desk. Mireth sat. Esmara reached under the desk and pulled out a key on a brass chain, and from a locked drawer she withdrew a single, small book bound in cracked leather, the size of a hand, its cover stamped with a single symbol, a quill crossed with a flame. Quote 10, quote, she said. Quote 11, quote. Mireth did not reach for the book. She was afraid to touch it. Quote 12, quote. Esmara smiled. It was a small smile, tired and patient and very old. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 13, underscore, underscore. For the next 9 nights, Mireth Solandar did not sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch. She attended her daytime classes. She sat through her lectures with the same blank, polite expression she had worn for 3 years. She failed an 8th examination on purpose, because Esmara had warned her that any sudden improvement would attract exactly the attention they were not yet ready for. And every night, from the supper bell until 2 hours before dawn, she descended the spiral staircase behind the eastern column and learned the discipline that the Academy had forgotten. Ink magic, dear viewer, is not what you probably think it is. It is not the casting of spells from a written page. It is something stranger and older than that. The founder, Velvern Auralis, discovered it, or rediscovered it, in a series of caves in the Carthan foothills, where pre-academic monks had been practicing it for centuries before anyone built a school. The principle is this: ink, properly made, with the right binders and the right minerals and the right fixing salts, is not an inert substance. It is a recording medium. And what it records is not letters. It records intention. When a normal student writes an answer on an examination, the ink records the letters. The reader stone, which the founder built, then reads those letters and assesses them. But Magister Auralis built the reader to do something more than that, something the modern faculty had forgotten was even possible. The reader was designed to read past the letters, into the intention beneath them. And students from a particular bloodline, students with a particular kind of mind, wrote answers whose intention did not match the letters on the page. In other words, when Mireth Solandar wrote a theoretical resonance examination, her hand wrote what the question asked, but her intention, recorded in the ink at a level the modern reader could no longer perceive, was answering a different question entirely, a deeper question. The question the founder had originally meant to ask before 2 centuries of curriculum drift had buried it. The reader stone, faced with a parchment whose surface said one thing and whose ink said another, did the only thing it could do. It registered total incoherence. Grade 3, grade 0, grade failed. As Mara explained all of this to Mireth on the second night, sitting at the small desk with the founder's journal open between them, and Mireth wept for nearly an hour. 3 years of humiliation, 7 examinations, the laughter of Halvar Thren, the marginal note calling her a polite waste of stone. All of it had been the system reading her wrong, because the system had forgotten how to read. On the third night, Esmera taught her how to do it on purpose, how to write, with full intention, in a way that the surface said one thing, and the depth said another. By the 5th night, Mireth could compose a single sentence, "The kitchen door is closed," whose surface read those words, and whose depth read a complete argument about the structure of memory. By the 7th night, she had written on a single sheet of parchment a passage whose surface said nothing more than a child's nursery rhyme, and whose depth contained a working repair for the Academy's failing heating system. And on the 9th night, very late, with Esmera watching from the doorway, Mireth Solandar wrote a single word on the inner wall of the deep library, a word in ink she had mixed herself from the founder's recipe. And the wall, the stone wall that had been quarried 200 years ago by Magister Velvern Auralis with his own hands, glowed faintly from within. The wall remembered him, and it had just been spoken to in his language by a hand that carried his blood for the first time in 200 years. Esmera, watching from the doorway, sat down on the floor and cried. Dear viewer, before I tell you what happened in the Dismissal Chamber, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. RiseArc lives on these stories, and the only reason I can spend 6 months in a dusty archive digging up a tale like this one is because viewers like you stay with me until the end. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and let's get back to the part where Mireth Solandar walks into a room designed to destroy a single sheet of stiff blue paper with 3 signatures at the bottom: the proctor, Halvar Thren, the provost, Mansell Quintarn, and the chancellor's deputy, a woman named Veska Olburn, whose name Mireth had never heard before. Mireth read the notice. She folded it once. She put it in her satchel next to the 7 failed examinations she had been carrying around for 3 years, and she went to her morning class. The dismissal chamber, as I mentioned at the start of this video, sits beneath the central rotunda, 3 flights below the visible floor. There is exactly 1 door. There is no second exit. By design, the founder had specified that any student facing dismissal must walk out the same way they walked in, with no shortcuts available to spare anyone embarrassment. The chamber is roughly hexagonal. The walls are pale gray stone. There is a single long table at the far end where the dismissal panel sits, and a single small chair in the middle of the room where the student sits. There are no windows. The light comes from 6 wall lamps, 1 in each corner, lit with the same fuelless flame as the assessment vault. When Mireth Solandar walked into the dismissal chamber at the 2nd hour of the 14th day, She was carrying a small leather satchel. Inside the satchel were 3 things: her 7 failed examinations, a single piece of fresh parchment, and a small glass vial of ink she had mixed herself the night before from a recipe in the founder's first journal. The panel was already seated. Halvar Thren, the proctor, sat on the left, looking smug. Veska Olburn, the chancellor's deputy, sat on the right, looking bored. And in the center, behind a stack of papers 2 inches thick, sat Provost Mansell Quintarn, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a square gray beard and small, wet eyes that always looked as though he had just finished laughing at a joke nobody else had heard. The provost said, not looking up from his papers. Mireth did not sit. She walked to the center of the room, set her satchel on the floor, and looked at all 3 of them. She said. There was a pause. Veska Olburn looked up. Halvar Thren smirked. The provost finally raised his small, wet eyes. Mireth said calmly. Halvar Thren laughed out loud. The provost considered her for a long moment, and then, because he was the kind of man who enjoyed watching a small humiliation become a large one, he gestured with one fat hand and said, Quote 23. Mireth knelt, opened her satchel, and took out the parchment, the quill, and the vial of ink. She did not use the parchment. She uncorked the vial, dipped the quill, walked to the wall directly behind the provost's chair, and on the pale gray stone she wrote, in a careful, deliberate hand, 6 words. The surface of the 6 words read, I am here by my right. The depth of the 6 words, recorded in the ink at a level no one in the chamber but Mireth herself could perceive, read something else entirely. It read the full lineage of the Auralis family, from the founder to the present day, with Mireth Solandar's name as the final entry, and beneath the lineage, the founder's personal seal had been encoded as a working command. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Halvar Thren began to laugh again. The provost opened his mouth to dismiss the entire performance. Veska Olburn looked at her fingernails. And then the wall lit up. It did not glow faintly the way the deep library wall had glowed 9 nights earlier. It burned. A vein of pale gold light spread out from the 6 words Mireth had written, climbed the wall to the ceiling, ran along the ceiling to all 6 corners, and dropped down each of the other 5 walls in a perfect, symmetrical web. Within 10 seconds, the entire dismissal chamber was glowing from the inside of its stone, as if the building itself had remembered it had a heart and had decided, after 2 centuries, to start it beating again. Halvar Thren stopped laughing. Veska Olburn stood up so fast her chair fell backward. The provost did not move. He sat in his chair with his small, wet eyes locked on the glowing wall behind him, and he did not move for nearly a minute. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone strange. Where did you get that ink, Miss Solandar? Mireth turned to face him. I mixed it from a recipe in Magister Auralis's first journal. That journal is sealed. Not the one in the vault, the real one. A long silence. The web of golden light on the walls did not fade. It pulsed, very gently, in time with something, Mireth realized, with a small shock that it was pulsing in time with her own heartbeat. The provost set down his pen. He looked at Halvar Thren, who had gone the color of dirty milk. He looked at Veska Olburn, who had not yet picked up her chair. And then he looked back at Mireth Solandar, and in a voice that was no longer smug or bored or anything but very tired, he said, This hearing is suspended. Miss Solandar, please remain in the academy. Do not leave the grounds. Someone will speak with you within the hour. Mireth picked up her satchel. She walked to the door, and as she opened it, she turned back and said one more sentence, politely, because as Mara had told her that the first move of power should always be polite. Provost, the wall has remembered me. By the founder's own command, recorded in the stone you are sitting in, this academy is now mine to administer. I will speak with the panel about transition arrangements tomorrow morning at the 8th hour. Please be on time. And she walked out, and she closed the door behind her, and the golden web on the walls continued to pulse for another 40 minutes before it slowly, reluctantly, faded back into the stone. By the morning of the 15th day, the entire academy knew. Nobody knew exactly what had happened in the dismissal chamber because the panel had not spoken about it, and Mireth had not spoken about it. But by the breakfast bell, the rumor had traveled through every dormitory, every classroom, and every kitchen, and the rumor was this. The girl who had failed 7 examinations had walked into the dismissal chamber and walked out with the academy in her pocket. The rumor was wrong about the mechanism, but it was right about the outcome. And by the second hour of the 15th day, students had started showing up at Mireth's dormitory door. Not the ones you would expect, not the noble children from the front rows, not the merchant class strivers from the middle. The students who came to Mireth's door on the 15th day were the others, the quiet ones from the back of the examination hall, the ones who had also been failing, who had also been mocked, who had also been scheduled one by one for the dismissal chamber. The first to arrive was a tall, thin boy named Theron Alvain, who had failed every practical combat assessment for 2 years, despite being, by his own claim, the best fencer in the western provinces. Mireth let him in. She listened to him talk for 15 minutes. She asked him to demonstrate. He drew the small ceremonial blade he carried at his belt, performed a single cut in the empty air of her dormitory, and the air itself, Mireth saw it clearly with her new sight, recorded the intention of the cut in something that was not ink but was its cousin. Theron Alvain was a practitioner of edge memory, a discipline the Academy had stopped teaching 70 years ago. He had been failing the modern combat assessments because the modern combat assessments could not see what he was doing. The second to arrive was a short, broad-shouldered girl named Brisla Tavenmore, who had been failing every herbalism examination for a year and a half. She turned out to be a practitioner of root listening, a discipline the Academy had stopped teaching 90 years ago. The third was a quiet boy with a stammer named Cavan Pello, who had been failing voice projection for 3 terms. He was a practitioner of breath binding, a discipline the Academy had stopped teaching 120 years ago. The fourth was a girl named Anne Velinord. Yes, dear viewer, that surname is not a coincidence. She was Esmara's great-great-niece, who had been failing every theoretical examination since her first term, and who turned out to be a practitioner of the same ink magic Mireth had just rediscovered. She had been doing it instinctively, without ever knowing what she was doing, and her examinations had been registering grades of 7, 9, and 4. By the end of the 15th day, 11 students had come to Mireth's door. By the end of the 16th day, the number was 23. By the end of the 17th day, it was 41. Every one of them was a so-called failure. Every one of them was a practitioner of a discipline the Academy had forgotten existed. And every one of them, when Mireth asked them the same simple question, "Will you help me rebuild this school?" said yes without hesitating. On the night of the 17th day, Esmara Velinord asked Mireth to come down to the deep library alone. The old woman was sitting at her small desk, but the desk had been cleared. On its surface lay 3 objects: the founder's first journal, a small wooden box Mireth had never seen before, and a folded letter sealed with red wax. Esmara said. Mireth sat. Esmara opened the small wooden box. Inside, on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a single silver ring with a flat oval seal. The seal was the founder's mark, a quill crossed with a flame. This was Velvern Auralis's personal seal ring, Esmara said. He gave it to his daughter on her wedding day. She gave it to her daughter on hers. It is passed down through 9 generations, mother to daughter, in a single unbroken line. The last woman who wore it was your grandmother. She gave it to her daughter, your mother, on the day your mother left the family to marry a man your grandmother disapproved of. A man who was, in her view, beneath the family station. Mireth could not speak. Your mother, Esmara continued gently, is a woman named Mireth Solandar, who runs a small herbalist shop in the village of Holloway-on-Bren. She is the direct descendant of Magister Velvern Auralis through 9 generations of mothers. You are the 10th. She left this academy and the family that ran it because she did not want her daughter raised inside the orthodoxy that had killed the founder's actual teachings. She wanted you to grow up free of all of this, to be your own person, and to come to this place, if you ever came, by your own choice and your own talent. Esmera closed the box and slid it across the desk. She told me 16 years ago that if you ever found your way to the Deep Library, I was to give you this ring. She told me to tell you that she loves you, that she is proud of you, and that whatever you decide to do with this academy, she will support you. She also told me to tell you one more thing. What? That she failed 7 examinations herself before she left. Mireth, dear viewer, did not cry. She had cried on the second night when she had understood about the ink. She did not cry now. She picked up the ring. She slid it onto the 3rd finger of her right hand. And she sat in Esmera's chair for a long time, looking at the silver seal. And then she said, very quietly, Act 9, Return/Rewriting the Curriculum. The 8th hour of the 18th day arrived, and Mireth Solandar walked into the Chancellor's audience hall wearing a plain student's robe, her grandmother's ring on her right hand, and the founder's first journal under her left arm. Behind her walked 41 students. Behind the students walked Esmera Velinord, who had not set foot above the Deep Library in 11 years. What happened in that hall over the next 72 hours is the part of this story that, dear viewer, is going to be hardest to compress, but I will try. Mireth presented to the assembled faculty a complete restoration of the founder's original curriculum. Not a replacement of the modern one, a restoration of what had been beneath it all along. She demonstrated with the help of her 41 students that the academy had been failing students for at least a century who were actually practicing real and powerful disciplines the system had simply lost the ability to assess. She presented the founder's seal on the wall of the Dismissal Chamber, which had glowed again when she walked in, gently this time, like a quiet acknowledgement. And she presented her grandmother's ring and her mother's name in the founder's first journal, and Esmera Velinord's testimony. By the end of the first day, the faculty had voted to suspend all pending dismissals. By the end of the second day, they had voted to recall the 72 students dismissed in the previous 5 years and offer them reinstatement. By the end of the third day, Provost Mansell Quintarn, the man with the small wet eyes who had laughed at her in the dismissal chamber, submitted his resignation in writing. He cited, quote, 42. He was 64 years old. He did not collect stamps. He left the academy 4 days later and was last seen taking a coach east toward Carthen, which, dear viewer, is going to matter in a minute. By the morning of the 21st day, Mireth Solandar, 19 years old, daughter of a herbalist, failed student of 7 examinations, was the acting administrator of Argentwhile Academy. She did not call herself chancellor. She refused the title. She told the faculty she would hold the role for 1 year, at the end of which the academy would hold its first open election in 200 years. She moved out of her old dormitory and into a small room near the Deep Library, where Esmera could reach her. She moved out of her old dormitory and into a small room near the Deep Library, where Esmera could reach her in 2 minutes if anything went wrong. She kept her grandmother's ring on her right hand and the founder's first journal on her desk, and she began, very methodically, to rewrite the curriculum of Argentwhile Academy. The work happened in 72 hours, dear viewer, because Mireth refused to let it take longer. She had 41 practitioners of forgotten disciplines living in her academy, and every day the old curriculum remained in force was another day those students were being graded as failures by a reader stone that could no longer hear them. So she sat in the Chancellor's audience hall with Esmera on her right and Theron Alvain on her left, and the 3 of them, with relays of students fetching books from the Deep Library, drafted, debated, and ratified a new course of study. The new curriculum had 3 principles. First, no student would ever again be assessed by a single instrument. Second, Any examination that produced an anomalous grade would be reread by a human committee before any dismissal was filed. Third, the 11 forgotten disciplines that her 41 students collectively practiced would be restored to the formal course catalog, with the practitioners themselves serving as the first generation of instructors. By the morning of the 21st day, when the sun rose over the eastern wing of Argentwhile Academy, the new curriculum was law. And the 72 students who had been dismissed in the previous 5 years had been sent letters offering them their seats back, with apologies, signed by Mireth Solandar. The faculty hated her for it, dear viewer. About a third of them anyway. Another third was bewildered, and the final third, the quiet ones, the ones who had been teaching the modern curriculum for decades while privately suspecting that something had gone wrong, wept openly during the ratification vote and then came up to Mireth afterwards to thank her, one by one. But while Mireth was rewriting the academy, Provost Mansell Quintarn had been taking a coach east toward Carthan. And here, dear viewer, is where the story stops being about a student rebuilding a school and starts being about 3 rival academies deciding that this child must not be allowed to live to see her 20th birthday. Argentwhile is not the only academy in the world. It is not even the oldest. In a triangle of mountain valleys, roughly 400 miles to the east and south, 3 rival schools have existed since before Magister Velvern Auralis was born. Their names are Carthan, Vexley, and Drumnir. Carthan Academy specializes in martial disciplines. It produces, every year, the finest combat magicians in the world, and it sells their services to the highest bidder. Carthan is run by a council of 7 warlords, and it has a private army of 3,000 soldiers. Vexley Academy specializes in commerce and finance. It produces, every year, the merchant magicians who run the banks, the trading houses, and the insurance guilds of the entire continent. Vexley has no army. Vexley has, instead, a network of debts, contracts, and obligations that reaches into every government from the western coast to the eastern sea. Drumnir Academy specializes in nothing in particular and everything in general. Drumnir produces administrators, spies, and diplomats. Drumnir is run by a single man, Archon Selvarn Drumnir, the 4th of his line, and Archon Selvarn Drumnir is the only living person who hates the Auralis bloodline more than he hates death itself. I will explain why in a moment. First, you need to understand what these 3 academies did when they heard about Mireth Solandar. On the 23rd day, an envoy from Carthan arrived at the gates of Argentwhile. He was a tall man in red leather armor with the warlord's sigil on his chest, and he requested an audience with the new administrator. Mireth received him in the Chancellor's audience hall, sitting in the Chancellor's chair for the first and last time. The envoy bowed. He delivered a single message. Carthan Academy, he said, was prepared to offer Mireth Solandar a permanent appointment as a senior instructor, a salary of 40,000 crowns a year, and a personal house in the warlord's quarter, in exchange for the immediate transfer of Magister Velvern Auralis's first journal and all associated materials to Carthan's archives. Mireth listened politely. She thanked the envoy. She refused. The envoy bowed again and left. On the 24th day, an envoy from Vexley arrived. She was a small, elegant woman in a black silk dress with a silver chain of office around her neck. Her offer was different. Vexley Academy, she said, was prepared to purchase Argentwhile Academy outright. The buildings, the lands, the library, the staff, and the founder's journal for the sum of 2 million crowns, payable immediately, with Mireth Solandar to be retained as a consultant at 15,000 crowns a year. Mireth listened politely. She thanked the envoy. She refused. The envoy smiled, bowed, and left. And as she left, she said, quietly, just at the door, quote 43. On the 25th day, no envoy arrived from Drumnir. Instead, a single letter was delivered. The letter was written on black paper in white ink, sealed with the Drumnir mark, and it contained exactly 4 sentences, quote _ 44, quote. Mireth read the letter twice. She folded it. She walked down to the deep library and showed it to Esmera Velenord, and Esmera, after reading it, sat very still for a long moment, and then said the sentence that finally explained everything. __quote _45 _ the assassin came on the 30th day. Dear viewer, and he came in the form of a first-year transfer student. His name on the transfer papers was Corvus Halithan. He was 19 years old, according to the documents. He was a scholarship student from a small provincial school in the southern Lake Country. He had been admitted to Argentwhile as part of the new open enrollment policy that Mireth had personally championed, the one that allowed any student who had been failed by another academy's assessment system to apply for re-evaluation at Argentwhile under the restored curriculum. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of student Mireth had built the new school for. He arrived with one small leather bag. He was assigned a room on the 3rd floor of the Eastern Dormitory. He attended his first 3 days of classes quietly. He made no friends and no enemies. The other students described him later as polite, a little quiet, a little sad. On the night of the 33rd day, very late, Corvus Halithan left his dormitory room. He walked down the eastern stair, across the central courtyard, past the rotunda, and down the spiral staircase behind the eastern column. He carried no weapons that anyone saw. He moved with the slow, steady pace of a student who had just remembered he had left a book in the library. He entered the deep library at the 3rd hour after midnight. Esmera Velenord was asleep in her chair, the founder's first journal closed on the desk in front of her. Mireth Solandar was 3 aisles deep into the stacks, on a small reading stool, working by the light of a single floating orb on a passage of ink magic that had been giving her trouble for 2 nights. Corvus Halithan walked past Esmera's desk without a sound. He walked down the central aisle, turned left at the 3rd row, and approached Mireth from behind. He drew a knife from inside his sleeve, a thin black blade about 6 inches long, made of something that was not steel, because steel would have set off the wards. He took 2 more silent steps. He raised the knife. And then, dear viewer, the floor beneath his feet wrote something. This is the part I had to read 3 different witness statements to confirm, because it sounds impossible, but every account agrees. The stone floor of the deep library, which Magister Velvern Auralis had laid with his own hands 200 years ago, lit up beneath Corvus Halithan with a vein of pale gold light that spelled out a single word in the founder's hand. The word was unwelcome. And the moment the word fully formed, the floor under Corvus Halithan's feet became, for a single second, soft. He fell. He did not fall through the floor. The floor sealed itself again immediately, but he fell down to one knee, and the knife in his hand went wide of its target. Mireth heard the small sound behind her, turned on her reading stool, and looked into the face of the man who had been sent to murder her. She did not scream. She did not run. She lifted her right hand, the one with her grandmother's ring on the 3rd finger, and she pointed at him. And the ink in her veins, which she had been practicing with for 33 days, did what she had been training it to do. A line of ink rose from the open book on Esmera's distant desk. It rose, it crossed the entire library through the air in a single black ribbon, and it wrapped itself around Corvus Halithan's knife hand and bound it to his own throat. The ink was not water, and it was not rope. It was intention. The intention was, this hand will not move again until the woman in this room releases it. Corvus Halithan tried, very hard, to move his hand. He could not. He tried to drop the knife. He could not. He tried to step backwards. The floor, still glowing faintly with the word unwelcome, would not let him. Mireth stood up from her reading stool. She walked, calmly, to a position 3 feet in front of him. She looked into his face. He was, she noticed for the first time, not 19 years old. He was closer to 30. The transfer papers had been forged. Quote, 47, quote, she said. He did not answer. Quote, 48, quote. He tried to spit at her. The ink would not let his head move. Quote, 49, quote, she said. Quote, 50, quote. And she did something then, dear viewer. that she had read about in the founder's first journal but had never tried. She placed her left palm flat against the assassin's forehead, and she let her ink sense reach gently through his skin and into the surface intention of his mind. Not deep, not into his memories, just into the most recent layer of his purpose. She was not reading his thoughts. She was reading what he had been told to do. She read it. She removed her hand. She stepped back. She walked to Asmara's desk and woke the old woman. And when Asmara opened her eyes, Mireth said, very quietly, "He was sent by the Drumnir family. He was promised 4,000 crowns. His real name is Halvin Marsk. He has a wife and a child in a village called Brenholm. The handler who briefed him is a Drumnir intelligence officer named Valantra Kresk. The Archon himself signed the order." Asmara nodded slowly. "What do you want to do with him?" Mireth turned back to the assassin. The ink still held his hand to his throat. The floor still held his feet. She thought for a long time. Then she said, "I want to send him home." Asmara raised an eyebrow. "Alive," Mireth said. "I want to send him home alive, to his wife and his child in Brenholm. I want to give him a horse and a bag of bread and 300 crowns out of my own stipend. And I want him to deliver one letter in his own hand to Archon Selvarn Drumnir." "What letter?" Mireth walked to Asmara's desk. She took a sheet of fresh parchment. She uncorked her own ink vial and she wrote 3 sentences. The surface of the 3 sentences read, "I received your letter. Thank you for the warning. I am still alive." The depth of the 3 sentences, recorded in ink at a level no human in the Drumnir household but Selvarn himself would be able to read, contained the founder's hidden information, the single piece of knowledge that the Drumnir family had been hunting Auralis blood for 200 years to suppress. Mireth did not write the entire document. She wrote only the first sentence of it. A demonstration. A and I will not be kind a second time. Go. He went, dear viewer. He went. He took the horse and the bread and the 300 crowns. He delivered the letter. He went home to his wife and his child in Brenholm, and he never carried a knife again as long as he lived. We know this because 40 years later, when he was an old man, he wrote a small private memoir for his grandchildren in which he described the night he tried to kill a 19-year-old girl in a library and was forgiven. And the memoir surfaced in a regional archive in 1981, and it is the source of about a third of what I have just told you. But the Archon, dear viewer, the Archon read the letter. The Archon read both layers of the letter. And the Archon, sitting in his black tower in the mountains of Drumnir, understood for the first time exactly what Mireth Solandar could do, and exactly how much of the founder's hidden information she had already recovered. And the Archon began, quietly, methodically, to prepare for war. I want to leave the war for a moment, dear viewer, because the war is going to take the entire next episode to tell, and this episode needs to end somewhere warmer than a black tower in the mountains. So let me tell you about the 37th day. On the morning of the 37th day, a small woman in a gray wool cloak walked through the eastern gate of Argentwhile Academy carrying a wicker basket. The night porter, Brunwick Holdmer, did not recognize her. He asked her name. She said, "Herbalist Solandar. I have come to see my daughter." Brunwick, who had worked the gate for 40 years, who had watched Mireth walk through it as a soaked, failed student 37 days earlier, sat down on his stool and did not get up for nearly a minute. Then he stood, very slowly, and he opened the inner gate himself, and he walked Herbalist Solandar across the central courtyard to the small room near the deep library where her daughter was sleeping. Mireth had not slept properly in a week. The new curriculum, the envoys, the assassin, the war preparations, all of it had been on her shoulders without a break for 37 days. When Asmara knocked softly on her door at the 9th hour of the morning, Mireth opened it, expecting another emergency. She saw her mother instead, and she saw her mother holding a wicker basket, and she saw, in the wicker basket, a small clay pot of the lentil stew her mother had made every winter morning of her childhood. Mireth, dear viewer, did not say anything. She did not say mama, and she did not say I missed you, and she did not say, why didn't you tell me? I gave you a name that meant small light, because I wanted you to be small and to be light. I was wrong about the small part, but I was right about the light. You are still light, Mireth. Do not let what comes next make you forget that. They drank tea after the stew. Halen stayed for 3 days. She met the 41 students. She met Esmara properly for the first time in 20 years, because Esmara had been her own teacher once, in a time before Halen had left. She met Theron and Brisla and Cavan and Aun. She blessed the small room near the deep library by hanging a single dried sprig of mountain thyme above the door, the way she had hung one above every door of every house Mireth had ever lived in. And on the morning of the 40th day, she went home to Holloway-on-Bren. Because the herbalist's shop did not run itself, and because she trusted her daughter to do what came next. That afternoon, dear viewer, a single black bird landed on the windowsill of the small room near the deep library. The bird had a brass capsule tied to its leg. Mireth removed the capsule, opened it, and unrolled a single sheet of black paper. The paper had 3 words on it, written in white ink, in the Archon's own hand. The 3 words were, "Winter is coming." Mireth read the words. She walked to her window. She looked east, toward the mountains where Drumnir's black tower sat above the cloud line. And she did something that she had not done in 37 days. She smiled. Not a small smile, not a polite smile, a real one. The kind of smile her grandmother had worn in the single painted portrait that still hung in the deep library. The painting Mireth had not understood the first 10 times she had looked at it. She smiled, dear viewer, because she finally did. In the next episode of RiseArc, and I promise you, this one is going to be the biggest story we have ever told on this channel. Archon Selvarn Drumnir marches 3,000 soldiers and a private legion of war mages out of his black tower and toward the gates of Argentwhile Academy. Mireth Solandar, 19 years old, with 41 students, one 91-year-old librarian, and a curriculum that is 6 weeks old, has to defend the school her ancestor built against the army of the man who murdered him. And dear viewer, there is one more thing. The hidden information that Magister Velvern Auralis encoded in the deep library 200 years ago, the information the Drumnir family has been hunting Auralis blood to suppress for 10 generations, Mireth is about to read the rest of it. And what she finds inside it is going to change not just the war, not just the academy, but the entire structure of magic in the world she lives in. If you want to see how this saga ends, or rather, how the next chapter of it begins, hit subscribe to RiseArc right now and ring that bell, because episode 8 drops in 4 days, and you do not want to miss the moment Mireth Solandar walks out onto the walls of Argentwhile and writes her first word of war. Some students fail because the exam asks the wrong question. And the next question, dear viewer, will not be answered in ink. It will be answered in fire. See you in the next legend.